my dad ends up joining the cartel. He's delivering money, delivering drugs, doing all kinds of stuff all the way to Mexico. Says, you know what? I'm going to go to Mexico. I'm going to move to Mexico. And he abandons my family and he moves to Mexico. Unbeknownst to us, he had another family there. But eventually, the cartel calls my family and they say, hey, if you ever want to see your dad again, you need to pay us X amount of money. Well, we don't have that type of money. And so I haven't seen my dad since.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Living Enviado podcast. My name is Steve Shermer and I'm your host. And today I've got an incredible guest because I invited him on here. Now, let me just say this. We're actually going to talk about something else also, but I invited him on here to talk about art and the gospel. And then as I got to know him a little bit more before we started recording, well, we're going to talk about the cartel as well. I don't know how we went from art to the cartel in this conversation. Well, at least I wasn't thinking about how we were going to do it, but I'm just going to let Mark tell you. So without further ado, let's welcome Mark Hernandez to the Living Enviado podcast. Hey, Mark, thank you for joining my podcast today. Why don't you just share a little bit about yourself or whatever you want to share about yourself and just give people some context of your background?
Yeah, so I'm from a small, tiny town in the panhandle of Texas called Friona. And my parents are both Mexican in origin. They were born in Mexico, and then their parents immigrated to the United States to work the fields. And so they didn't know each other prior to. They both met each other in this tiny town, and I guess they fell in love. They were young. They were both young. My dad was 16, my mom was 15 whenever they had me. And the crazy part is, you would expect that life is hard whenever you're a young parent. I had my first kids when I was in my mid to late 20s, but I could only imagine being 16 and 15 having a child. And so they struggled a lot. And they didn't have the best understanding of what it looked like to manage wealth or manage money or anything like that. And so they consistently struggled to the point where my dad ends up joining the cartel. And he's a part of the cartel. He's delivering money, delivering drugs, doing all kinds of stuff all the way to Mexico. Finally, whenever I was in high school, I guess I was a junior, I get a phone call and it's my dad and he's calling me from jail and he said, he's asking for forgiveness. He messed up. So he gets out of jail and says, you know what? I'm going to go to Mexico. I'm going to move to Mexico. And he abandons my family and he moves to Mexico. Unbeknownst to us, he had another family there. I don't know how to feel about that even to this day because that's hard. It's a hard situation. But eventually, the cartel calls my family and they say, hey, if you ever want to see your dad again, you need to pay us X amount of money. Well, we don't have that type of money. And so I haven't seen my dad since 2005, I believe, is the last time that I saw my dad. I say that, you asked me to describe where I come from. That's a shortened version of where I come from. And people might be wondering, well, why are you laughing about it? Like, that's no laughing matter, right? But the Lord does things in our lives that in the moment we don't understand. But in retrospect, when we look back on it, the Lord's hand has been so favorable to me. So if my father wouldn't have left, a thing that I didn't share is I was counting money for my father and I was delivering it to him once he moved to Mexico. So a guy would drop a duffel bag off full of money, $15, $20, $25,000 to the house in ones and fives. I would count it. And then that week, I'm 17 years old. That weekend, I would drive it all the way to Mexico by myself, cross the border with it and deliver it to my dad. And so he was already grooming me to be a part of the process, to be a part of el narcotráfico, you say it in Spanish. When that happened with my dad, then the Lord did something incredible. At the time, obviously, my life was broken. I was fearful for my family. I was fearful for my life. It was a time that was not a positive time. But afterwards, it opened up so many different opportunities because it gave the Lord an opportunity to speak into my life in ways that I never would have had the opportunity. There was a family in my hometown. They consistently invited me to church. I was good friends with their son. They would always say, hey, come to church. And I would always say no. And then eventually I just started coming to church. Well, when this stuff happened with my dad, we had nowhere to turn. And the Millers opened up their home. The church opened up their doors. They helped us financially when nobody else would, and they provided for us. And so around this time, they had asked me, Mark, what are you going to do? What are you going to do with your life? And I said, I don't know. I'm probably going to stay here and work, help my mom because I have three siblings. I said, I'll probably stay and help my mom because she needs the help. And the miller said, no, you can't do that. And I said, what do you mean? What do you mean I can't do that? And they said, well, you need to go to college. I said, well, I don't know anything about college. I'm the first person in my family to graduate high school. No one in my family has gone or graduated college, and so nobody knows the ins and outs of that. So they said, don't worry about it. Sign up. We'll go from there. So I applied. I got my acceptance letter to Lubbock Christian University. And then I got into my college years, which were very difficult because Lubbock Christian University is a private university. And so you don't see a lot of people like me there. I think I was one of very few Hispanic males there and one kid who just wasn't supposed to be there. I would say that most of the people that send their kids to private school are well off or they've navigated through college before, but in my family, we'd never done anything like that. So I had no clue what I was doing. I was depressed. I was lonely. I was scared. I had all the negative emotions that a person would have. I was mourning my father. I was mostly scared because I didn't know what the heck I was doing in college. What am I going to study? What am I going to do? It got to the point where I almost failed out of school and I had to write a letter to the dean's office and they allowed me to stay. While I was there, two key people that really helped me to unravel the gifting that the Lord had put on my heart. One of them was Maria Elena Perez. I used to be really ashamed of being Hispanic or being Mexican because of the stereotypes, and my family fit all the stereotypes. We worked the fields. My dad was in the cartel. The rest of my family were hard workers. And so I was like, man, I hate this. But Miss Perez really showed me a true understanding of the culture, the beauty behind the culture. She showed me that they were Mexican artists, Mexican politicians, people that made a difference in the world that I had never heard about. And so she completely changed my life and gave me a new understanding of what it looked like to be Hispanic. I'm going to pause right there
I,
because I've
I
talked a
will
lot.
I will say that is quite the intro. And
Yeah.
and there were some things you said I mean you didn't even tell me before we got on here. I am just kind of curious because you did navigate over to the art, which we're going to talk about because that's why I brought you on here. But I'm just so you were talking about delivering money, counting money. You were 17. Is that what you said?
Yeah. Yeah.
So did you know why you were counting money?
Yeah. So my dad, in Hispanic culture, there's a whole machismo is so taboo. If you're a macho guy, you're not going to question your superiors, and that person, the most important person in a family, is your father. Honestly, I was always really scared to ask my dad for anything. I wouldn't ask him for $5. I wouldn't. I was really scared. He just instilled fear in us at an early age. It's changed for me. I hug my kids. I love on my kids. I tell them I'm proud of them. I want to make sure that they understand that their dad is there for them physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And that's something that my father just never provided for me. And so I say all that to say that when my dad asked me, he didn't really ask me. He said, this is what you will do. A guy's going to come to the house. He's going to drop off a duffel bag. Your job is to count the money, and then you're going to bring that money to me. So the trip from my house to where he was is 7-hour trip and crossing the border. A guy would bring the money, and I will tell you, man, some people always talk about the smell of money, but for me, that's something completely different because it was the most atrocious scent. I'd be sitting in my bedroom with the door locked, counting money in ones and fives, and it was just the nastiest smell that you could ever imagine. And I don't know why, I don't know, I don't know the chemical process or whatever, but I know a part of it must have been that I knew that it was coming from drugs, and so it made it even more disgusting to me.
I mean, I can't even imagine, but I think you pointed out something very important. There's a cultural aspect to this.
Yeah.
There's I mean, pretty much anywhere you go in the world, when we look at something and we think, oh, they're wrong. I mean, yeah, there's right and wrong, irregardless of culture, but there's a way of thinking, there's a way of responding, to authority, especially in this case, in your family and in your cultural background to just the father. the father figure. The same, I find the same in the Middle East or South Asia or even China, places like that. There's a level where you never question the father or whoever the patriarch of the family is. What they say is
Yeah.
law, and you do it whether you like it or not. And it doesn't change till you become the patriarch, and then you get the choice
Yeah.
of deciding. But same time, just the people he's running around with, I can't even imagine knowing the type of people he's running around with, and knowing that in the back of my mind, and knowing what they're capable of, and how that could negatively affect your family. Which you even discussed how it maybe not. I want to say passively. It's not really passively, but they did come to you directly. But you said your dad was already out of the picture.
Hmm.
He'd already left and gone to Mexico. So there was still this level of fear, I can imagine, just knowing that your dad is still connected and they know who you are and they know where you're at. But I say all that because it also points out you were also just talking about how God brought you out, how God used that time in your life. You're talking about, I didn't get the first name, but Perez, the lady that was helping you, and just how she brought you and was exposing you to art, and just how either someone from Mexico or Hispanic background or from just non-American backgrounds, how they're engaged in the art scene. And I know that led to things into your future, into your current present
Yeah.
reality. I mean, I just find it incredible. I love stories when we see just how God removed our, irregardless of someone's circumstance, no matter how scary, no matter how difficult, no matter anything, it doesn't matter what it is, just how God brought people out. It just shows the power of God. It really does display the power of God in people's lives. Why don't you go into, you were talking about Perez and what she was doing, or what she was talking with you about art. Like, were you doing art? I know you mentioned the piece behind you is a piece of art you created. So were you
Uh-huh.
already painting or creating art, or is it something she said that just kind of sparked something inside of you? Like, how did that all unfold?
Because of my past and the way that my father was with me, because I was thinking back, like I'm crossing the border with thousands of dollars, and that's a federal crime, right? You're you're talking about a felony, and here I am, just a kid doing this stuff. My dad knows that if I get caught, I'm doing prison time. But I knew that there was something wrong because he modified the car that I would drive to where the money was hidden within the dash, and so I would hide all the money within there. Because of that experience, I always looked at that and said, man, if my own father cared so little about me, then who do I have that could actually love me? That thought ran through my mind, and that was one of the biggest parts of my life where I stumbled upon myself so often in thinking, when people would tell me, God loves you, God is there for you, God is this, well, I was equating God the Father to my earthly father. And I'm like, if my own earthly dad didn't love me, how could God possibly love me? And so when I got to college, that's when I met Maria Elena and Miss Perez. And she introduced me to so many different things within the culture that I had no clue existed. And one of those things was the art. And at the time, I was not painting, I wasn't drawing, I wasn't doing anything. But she introduced me to Jose Alfaro Siqueiros, to Diego Rivera, to other men and women who were painting what they saw, who were painting experiences. And I just never knew that that was a part of life, right? And whenever I saw that, I was thinking to myself, I could do that. Like I have some stories that I could paint. I have things that I could talk about. But it wasn't until I met with Dr. Laughlin, who was my science professor. So he was teaching cell biology, and I wasn't very good at science. I struggled a lot. But whenever we would do diagrams and things, I could draw them real well. And so one day he pulled me aside and he said, "Hey, let's talk." And I said, "All right." He said, "You're not very good at science, but you're really good at drawing and painting and drawing things. Why don't you look into that?" And so I took what Miss Perez had taught me, and then I took the encouragement from this man who doesn't know me from any other kid, and I put those things together and I said, let me see what this looks like. And so I started experimenting with painting stories and painting things that I knew were near and dear to me. And it really didn't develop from there. They just helped me to understand my culture. They helped me to understand who I was. And he helped me to understand that I had a gift of some sort. I never knew existed. It wasn't something that my parents ever said, "Hey, you're really good at this. Try it out." Because they were worried about, my mom was worried about paying the bills. My
Mm.
dad was worried about the things he was worried about. And so there was hardly ever any attention put on the kids. And hey, this is what you're good at. This is what we see in you.
I love the story about Dr. Laughlin. Is that how you say his name?
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're in science class and I guess you're terrible at it, which I am too. So I'm not knocking you on that. I was terrible at science. My kids are like the exact opposite. They're so good, and that's probably why my daughter wants to be a doctor. But the fact that a professor of a science course, notices the diagrams you draw. Obviously, it started with Miss Perez. I mean, she's introducing you to the arts, introducing you to the arts, I guess, from a standpoint from Mexico. And I
Yeah.
assume those are artists from down there. So it starts with her, it leads to a professor who barely knows you, and he's the one that points out your gift based on diagrams of your science homework, and then encourages you to go into exploring art. To me, I love stories like that because when I lived in China, there was and anytime when you're out of the country or anywhere in the world and you're doing ministry and you lead someone to Christ, there's this temptation to say, well, I did it. I led this person to Christ. It's like somehow that singular moment you were the one that did everything. But in reality, when I talk to people about what got them to the point of accepting the gospel, there was always this huge backstory behind them and multiple people that intersected with their lives that provided a piece of the puzzle of the gospel to them. And it just ultimately led to this one person who got to be like the tip of the spear, so to speak, and kind of wrap it all up. But that person did not do the hard work. There were so many other people behind the scenes that we don't get to see. And this is almost like the same thing, the same scenario. It's like, okay, first you were involved in this thing because of the pressure of the family pressure of not disobeying your father, of just trying to provide for your family, but also trying to simultaneously, I could understand, protect your family. And then it leads to a conversation with Miss Perez, who is introducing you something because you're trying to find an escape, which led to a science professor who says, hey, you're an artist. And I know this
Yeah.
because of the diagram. How do you know that someone's an artist based on a science diagram?
No, I think it was just I think his quote was it was just very accurate. Everything was like I was shading things and he's like people just usually turn in squiggles and here you are, you're turning a 3D rendering of this cell body. And I'm like, "Oh, well."
That's
So,
I love that. I mean, my daughter's I would consider my daughter and my son more on the artistic side. We've got a whole wall in our house that's just their artwork from kindergarten up until high school, and they've gotten really good. And my daughter wants to combine art with medical practice, like she wants to find a
mm,
way to do that. And so while she's majoring in a science because she is really good at it, she's wanting to minor in art or some kind of art. So she's
yeah.
dance, painting, all that stuff, theater. They've kind of dabbled in all of it. My son's doing the same thing. I love that, and I love that you're starting with stories because I think instead of just painting, general things or things that just okay, my teacher or my professor told me to paint this or design this, you're actually starting with kind of experiences of your life to help tell a story that
Yeah.
could speak to people. I mean, you showed me some on your phone when we met. So when your science professor does that, you start taking art classes?
No. I was still real messed up from the trauma that my father had left
Hmm.
or had given to me. I I spent about 3 years going to therapy, trying to figure out what this was. But those two people were main figures in my tenure at Lubbock Christian University. So the entire time that I was there, I was meeting with them. We were talking, and they were so encouraging towards me. By the time that I left, that I graduated college, I began to teach, but I was teaching Spanish, and my degree is in Spanish education. And slowly I found myself doing things here and there. Like I would paint something here, I'd paint something there, but it wasn't very, I never thought it was good. But I continued to practice it, I continued to do it. And then in 2019, I told my wife, I said, I feel like the Lord is calling me to do something more with art. I don't know what it is. I don't understand, but I feel this calling upon my heart. And so I told her, you know what? I'm going to fast over this. And I was on the second day of my fast. We were at a art competition for my students. And we were there and they were raffling off this watch. I should have wore it to show you, but they're raffling off this watch. And granted, I'm fasting during this time. So when I come back home in my prayer time, I said, Lord, if you want me to do this art thing, I will make paintings. I will do whatever it takes to use my gifting to share the gospel with people. I need you to show me that you want me to do this by allowing me to win this raffle. And so the third day comes along and they raffle off the watch. And guess what? I don't win the watch. And I'm leaving, and the lady that put this together, she comes up to me, and I got all my students' art in my cart, and I'm pushing it out of the door. And she said, "Hey, Mr. Hernandez, hold on." And I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, I don't know what it is, but the Lord put it on my heart to give you this gift." And it was a watch, exactly like the one that they raffled. And so, so from then I said, okay. Again, the Lord is so mysterious. If I would have won the raffle, I would have still questioned, and I would have said, maybe not. Maybe this isn't what I should be doing. But because he directly gifted it to me, then I knew for a fact that it was the Lord. This is what I prayed for. You answered my question, and so now I have to get in on this. So from that point, I started creating works that were intentional. Number one, about sharing stories, but sharing how God changed my life in each story. And so you will rarely catch me painting lions and lambs and talking about Jesus. You'll more so be looking at things like this artwork that's behind me because it's abstract. And one of the things that I've learned is that art transcends culture, art transcends understanding, art transcends hatred, art transcends so many different barriers. So for me to be able to put something together that tells a story but also gives glory to God has been such an incredible experience. And I have probably ministered to more people through my artwork than I ever have through my church because at church that's a body of believers where it's for the edification of the saints, right? But when I'm doing art exhibitions, you're talking about hundreds of people that are coming by, and they ask you about your art. They say, "Oh, well, this is very Mexican looking. Will you tell us about it?" Yeah. Well, this piece back here is my grandfather worked the fields his entire life, and he loved it. And he worked it from sun up to sundown, which is the colors that you see. And the crops that are around there, those are the crops that he worked with. But for me, that was the Lord's provision because the Lord showed me through my grandfather's life that hard work and dedication will allow you to get what you need, and he will provide for you through your job and what you're doing. And so this one right here is called Daily Bread. But each one of my art pieces, that's how I create them. That's the imagery that I use is always something that people can relate to, but it has a story that's meaningful, and it always turns back to the Lord and how he's changed my life.
Okay, I love the Gideon semi fail, the Gideon fleece fail that turned into a success of
Yeah.
the watch. I never recommend people doing a Gideon fleece type prayer too often. I have done some in my past, and God has spoken through some of them, not through all of them, but definitely through some of them. But I do love the fact that sometimes we just need some clarity. And even though it was like a fail for a moment in the sense that you didn't technically win the raffle, it was a success in the sense that God still knew our God still had a plan of using that watch or using a
Yeah.
watch like its identical twin to just speak to you. Because I love the art. Because I was going to ask you about the art piece behind you. Because when you said
Mhm.
that, the art has a meaning, it wants to speak to something in your past or in your life and just how God has used it. I was really curious about, the one behind you. And I love the fact you were talking about your grandfather and working in the fields, even though you said it's a stereotype, which I get, it is, but it's a beautiful, it's really a beautiful presentation of your family history and just how
Hmm.
it went from there to where you're at. And I think the one thing you said that I really want to highlight even more is you said God uses you more through your art than through your church in the sense that of connecting with people. And I think that's often where we get it confused in terms of ministry because we think, well, ministry is only done within the four walls of the church. And ministry is only done by the pastors who are on staff or the worship team who's standing up on the stage in front. But in reality, if we're going to reach people in our community, it has to bust beyond those walls. I mean, inside those walls are important. They're more like, I look at them as more of a training ground. Like, this is, I don't want to call it boot camp because it's not quite the same, but it is a training facility. That's probably a better way of saying it. It's a training facility for all believers to be equipped so they can leave those walls and actually go out into the harvest and be the hands and feet of Christ. The art piece, everyone who connects with you may not connect with me, but there are
Hmm.
people who connect with me who may not connect with you because I have a different set of skills. The business with Enviado, and just as it being media related, is going to connect with a little bit different people, our audience, than yours. And a doctor's audience is going to be different from ours. And so when we look at what an individual local church looks like, the demographics, the makeup, the ethnicities, the languages, whatever makes up our local churches, if everyone in the church would take seriously the skills God has given them, the passions like yours is art, and obviously skill, because a science professor figured it out, I think we'd be really shocked by how much people are going to connect with us if we find an intentional way to live it out like you have ultimately found, which I do want to bring up because you've already brought it up. You talked about art shows
Yes.
and galleries. I know you had mentioned Paris at one time. I think it was Paris when we were together a couple of weeks ago. Like, what
Yeah.
goes on with these galleries? Like, are you able to talk about like what's the mindset or the strategy behind all that?
It's really difficult to get into spaces, right? And that's one thing that will never change is the art scene is a hustle just like anything is a hustle. But because I've devoted my life, when I won that watch, Steve, I have devoted myself to going all out for the Lord. It didn't matter where, when, how. If there's an art opening that where I can submit to something, then I'll submit to it. For example, I guess it was 2 years ago, there was a call for art at the Latino Cultural Center. And the way that it happens is they'll do a call for art. For this one, they said it's lucha libre art. And I'm like, okay, I like lucha libre, Mexican wrestling, and it's part of my culture. But how do I turn that into into speaking about the Lord? And so if you go on my website, you can see what I've done. I have taken biblical stories, biblical narratives, and I've drawn them through the lens of Mexican wrestling. So there's one where there's a guy, he's flying off the top rope and he's about to do a heel kick to the head of this other guy who looks like he's wearing a Mexican wrestling mask that looks like Satan. And around it, I made this piñata fringe and it's colorful. And so I got into the show, I'm standing there, and one guy comes up to me and he said, "Hey man, I love this piece. It's really cool. Can you tell me about it?" He said, "I love LGBT and I see you use the rainbow. It's fantastic." And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, the rainbow is actually the promise of God that no matter who you are, where you've been, or anything like that, He just wants a relationship with you because He loves you. And what you see here is Jesus about to crush the head of Satan for your sins because He loves you so much and He wants to live an eternity with you." And if I had been on the street, Steve, wearing a shirt that said Jesus loves you and trying to talk to somebody, they would either flip me the bird or tell me, I don't want to talk about Jesus. I don't want to know anything about what you're about to say. But because it was art, he was super receptive. The thing that I didn't tell you is this guy was wearing a satanic shirt, upside down crosses all over his body. He had upside down cross necklaces. He had snake eye contacts, and his wife did as well. And they didn't turn it down. He then asked me, "Hey, how much do you want for it? Like, we really enjoy this piece." After I told them the price of it, then they didn't purchase it. But I think the beauty of it is that the Lord used that. And when Jesus says, when the Pharisees ask him to tell his disciples to stop speaking, he says, "Truly I tell you, even if they did stop, the rocks would cry out." And for me, that has been such a literal verse because all of this artwork, sometimes I don't even have to say anything. Sometimes people just come up to it, they read the description, and the Lord moves within them. I painted paintings where it's about abuse. Like I painted one painting of my mom, and all around her are these negative words or things that she went through in life. But the painting of my mother, on the inside where the flesh is, it's all biblical scripture.
I like the story of the painting and the one with the rainbow in it that you mentioned, because I think sometimes we think as Christians that we are just it's like we have to throw it in people's faces. We have to throw a cross in their face. We have to throw a Bible in their face. We have to throw Christian T-shirts in their face. We've got to just splatter it everywhere. Like that's the only way to share the gospel. And honestly, I think sometimes that's not probably the best way to have conversation starters. But I love the fact that the art that this person came up to you. Now, he mentioned something in your painting, the rainbow specifically, and how he initially interpreted it. But the fact that you didn't have anything like overtly Christian in the painting, it allowed you to be able to, it sparked the conversation. Actually, let me tell you what it actually represents. And it allowed you to be able to explain what the rainbow to you was representing in the painting, whereas his mind, it was going somewhere else where it wasn't your intention, but allowed you to open up the door for the gospel. And I find that in those scenarios, people are less defensive and more open to the conversation because you didn't just shove it in their face. I can't even count how many times I've heard people say, well, if a lesbian couple or a gay couple walked into your church, or even a trans couple walked into your church, how would you respond? Well, we're going to speak the truth to them. Well, what exactly does that mean? Are you just going to hit them over the head with the Bible? What about, when you've committed a sin? Are we supposed to walk over to you and hit you over the head with the Bible and just speak the truth to you in love? It's always like in love, but the tone of the voice isn't love. there,
Right.
there's a little bit of defensiveness behind the word love in that context. I really loved that you even shared that because, like the shirt I'm wearing, even though it's the point of the shirt really isn't so much about the business as it is hoping that someone will ask, what does that word mean? And what does it mean behind that word? Because I've created shirts in the past on the ministry side of my life that were evangelistic in nature, but not Christian in nature, not overtly
Yeah.
Christian in the design. And I've had people in multiple countries wear it, and they've come back to me and just shared how God allowed them to be able to share the gospel because someone walked up to them and said, what were those numbers? Like, what does that mean? Like, it's just confusing. Like, this doesn't even make sense as a design. But it was intriguing enough for them to ask, what is that? Which allowed them to share the gospel. And it really disarmed the other person because they're the ones who opened the door. And I find that with the shirts that I have, the art, as you were describing, in some ways it disarms people. And it's not going to say it's going to be perfectly disarming all the time, okay? Jesus say, if they persecuted me, they're going to persecute you also. We got to expect that sometimes there's going to be some pushback on some level. But with that, I do find that in many cases, people are disarmed if we're just not throwing it in their face. And there are ways to get into a gospel conversation. Now, you had mentioned a couple of weeks ago that with these galleries that, that I guess the people in charge of them that organize them, that sometimes they're looking for teams to come in, like are volunteers to come in, briefly, whether they're artists or not, I don't really know. But what do these volunteers do when they come to the art galleries?
There's two different types of art galleries, right? One of them is the type of art gallery that's going to sell art, and they're doing this to be able to make money. They're doing it to be able to have a profit. And those are usually the galleries that I'll submit to those here and there, and I'll get in here and there. I submit a lot to cultural centers and places like that because they're all about the messaging more so than sales. But the one gallery that I consistently work with is called Lose Art. And Lose Art is an international organization. It's run by a woman named Carmelita Greco. And her mission behind her gallery spaces is that she wants to deliver the gospel to people through the arts. So she has created a group of men and women, Christian artists, who have different talents. For example, I'm the guy that, like I said before, I don't necessarily paint lions and lambs, or I don't paint a depiction of Jesus' hands with holes or things like that. My spiel is always, how do I bend my culture to show Christ? But there are other artists within the organization who do paint lions and lambs. They are more literal with their painting of the scriptures. And so this organization, she's all over the world. She has a place here in Dallas. There's a place in New York City. She's got a location in Paris. She's got a location in Italy. And what she does is she will take the art to the location. So like right now there's an exhibition going on in Italy, and she needs people to be able to come in and share the gospel. So she has two people that are currently there, and they just sit in the gallery, and people come in and they have conversations about the art. They have conversations about who Jesus is, and they ask questions about the art. So the people that volunteer need to be knowledgeable in the scriptures. And also they get to know us as the artists as well, and we talk together and we discuss like, hey, Mark, I see this piece right here. It's kind of, we want to know more about it because it's hard for us to explain how the Lord is working through this artwork. But once I tell them, it helps them to understand what I'm trying to get across. And so this organization, if anyone's interested, is called, you can find it at loseart.com. She puts together so many different galleries in so many different places in the world. She also does a conference called Wild for Jesus, and it's a conference that is for Christian creatives. And so the last couple of years, we've done it in Wildwood, New Jersey. But it's a phenomenal time because you get people from all disciplines of the art. So you get dancers, singers, musicians, visual artists. All these people are getting together. It's a conference where we talk about our gifting. She brings men and women in like myself to give an example of how to advocate for yourself in the arts, but also how to use your art to honor the Lord. Because a lot of people, they'll create art and it's fun and they like it, but they're not really using it for anything. They're just, hey, if it sells, it sells. But for me, I'm the opposite. I'm thinking to myself, I'm making this for the content, and if someone wants to buy it, I hope that they do because I've prayed over the piece. I pray over all my work as I'm working on it, and I ask the Lord to empower the work that whoever buys it will have the presence of the living God, even if they're a non-believer, that they will have the presence of the living God in their home because they just purchased a piece from me. But this organization is incredible. She's a woman who just has a selflessness about her, and she's doing this this is something that God's put on her heart. So she provides for the whole thing. She endorses everything. She's financially backing all of it. But if there's someone out there that would like to be a part of it, she will take donations.
That's awesome because it was, as you were talking, there was two things that was reminding me of. So in China, when my family, when we used to live there, we had a team come, and a short-term team, and they were more accustomed to very, very direct evangelism, just get out there in people's faces. Nothing wrong with that necessarily, although in China I would argue against that. But they were more of just traditional ministry mindset. So when they came, there were so many people on the team, they split between our family and another family with a different organization. And when I sat with our team and says, now we weren't using art or anything like that. I was using coffee shops. I guess I have the gift of coffee shop. That would be my gift. And I would tell people, okay, you're going to go to these campuses, you're going to meet students, and then you're going to go to the coffee shops nearby, or you're going to go to restaurants, or you're going to go to these tourist spots, and you're going to hang out with these students. And while you're doing that, you're going to share the gospel, and you're going to try and drive the conversation. And I would show them step by step how to go from a general conversation to a gospel conversation without, putting anyone at risk. After a week, they came back to me. Now, they had led, I think, 8 students to Christ that week. I mean, it was just a phenomenal trip. But in debriefing, they admitted to me that they thought when I was doing the orientation, they thought I was crazy. They thought,
Yeah.
this isn't going to work. And instead of just listening to the guy who lived there, who knew what he was talking about, it was like, yeah, this stuff isn't going to work. And then at the end of the week, they're like, oh my gosh, this actually worked. So it's kind of the same thing of art. These 2 people who are in Italy, as you were talking about, going there, quote, I guess as a mission trip, but they're just hanging out.
Yeah.
They're not in a slum in the middle of India. They're not in a ghetto. They're not in a kind of Brazil. I forget what they call them down in Brazil, kind of similar to a slum area. But, they're not in those difficult, physically difficult places. They're in an art gallery. There's probably air conditioning. Yeah. Okay?
Yeah.
There's probably pretty nice coffee shops or cafes just around the corner from the gallery, But people are coming in and they're seeing the art. These people are connecting with them, and they're able to get to gospel conversations that way. I love the strategy you were talking about that Wow for Jesus has, because you had mentioned that to me, so I want to talk to you after we're done about that. We're going to put this in the show notes. So in the description, obviously Mark's website is going to be there if anyone wants to visit that. And then we'll include the Wow for Jesus website if there are artists out there that are intrigued by this and they want to learn more about these galleries and just how they're doing it. I think this really goes with a lot of conversations I have, because it's really no different from just a traditional businessman. It's just a matter of looking at what you're, kind of the industry you're in, the gifts you have, and just finding a way to be intentional about it. And, you don't have to be a seminary trained missionary or pastor to be able to reach people. That's kind of the biggest lie that Satan has convinced the church, that if you're not seminary trained or Bible trained in a traditional educational sense, then you're not worth anything to be able to reach people. Well, that's a complete fabrication of truth. And God doesn't need all of us in the seminaries. He just needs us to do what we're good at and to be intentional about it. That's just the key. We just have to, I tell missionaries when I get a chance, just like you create a ministry plan, or business people just want to start a business in overseas in the name of being a missionary, I often ask them, do you have a ministry plan? And does your ministry plan, does it work well with your business plan? Because if it doesn't, it's never going to work. But you have to think of your ministry plan just as much as you think of your business plan or your career plan, to figure out how you're going to connect with people, whether you're an employee or the employer, or whether you're an entrepreneur. It doesn't matter. So I'm just curious, just as we come to a close here, if you could speak to the people in your church, the people in my church or any church, and obviously not so much the pastors, so to speak, but just the typical Christian, the business people, the secular workers, what would you say to them about their life and being involved in spreading the gospel, whether it's locally or globally?
I'm a huge believer in spiritual gifts, and I'm a huge believer in you understanding what your spiritual gift is, because the Lord doesn't need all of us, like you said, Steve, to go to school, right? He doesn't need everyone to be a pastor. He doesn't need everyone to be an artist. He needs you to function well in the gifting that he's provided for you through the power of the Spirit. That's what God needs. And when you function well in that, then he will be honored and you will be doing what he's called you to do. Otherwise, you're going to struggle. It's so often that people will say, hey, Christian music used to be terrible. And what I mean by terrible is it just didn't sound good. People didn't want to listen to it. Christian movies, people didn't want to listen, didn't want to watch. Christian art, it just wasn't high quality. But when the people who are gifted in those things produce work for God, it's going to show up. And now we see people in the music industry who are doing wonderful things for Christian music. They're producing high quality, high caliber music. We're seeing that in movies now. Christian movies are no longer corny and cheesy. They're good. They're fun to watch. And we see that, and I see that with my counterparts and my friends who are Christian artists. If you want the Lord to work in your life and through your gifting, it has to be high quality. It cannot be something that you just slap on or do willy-nilly. It has to be done well. Otherwise, people are not going to take it seriously. And so I would say prepare yourselves in your gifting for what God has for you, because if you don't, you'll be ill prepared and you won't be ready. The scripture tells us that we should be prepared in and out of season. And that includes our gifting. That includes you knowing what you're good at and then fostering and growing that spiritual muscle so that you can go and perform alongside your counterparts. A beautiful part about Christendom is I don't have to outperform my Christian brothers and sisters when I'm making paintings or when I'm making art, because the things that I make, those are unique to me. And so the only person that I'm outperforming is the last thing that I currently made, because it's a different message, it's something different, everything has a different style to it. And I don't have to worry about my brothers and sisters. And for the most part, we walk alongside each other and help each other and encourage each other, and it makes things so much better. So I would say that, grow in your gifting, allow God to use it, and sharpen that sucker so that it can be so that it can be a deadly weapon for the kingdom.
Well, folks, you heard it right there. I mean, you heard Mark's story. You heard how God worked in his life, how he went from a life of being in a family that was connected, where his dad was working for the cartel, how there was pressure on him to be part of that life, and just the threats that were made to them. And then how God orchestrated things to go from that life to meeting this Miss Perez, to meeting his Christian professor at the university he was at, to a science professor telling him, dude, you have a gift for art, and just how all that began to work in his life to lead him down the path where now in 2025, he is using his gifts and his skills in art to spread the gospel, to advance God's kingdom. And just like Mark, you can do the same thing. And maybe it's not art, maybe it's business, maybe it's medicine or education or some other career path or other skill set. God designed you with those skills. God designed you with those passions and talents for a reason. And that wasn't just to make yourself rich or to make yourself comfortable. It is to glorify his name and to advance his kingdom. So let's mimic the life of Mark Hernandez. Let's take what God has given us, let's apply it to God's kingdom, and let's advance the gospel. And as you do that, I would just encourage you, if you found value with this interview, this conversation I had with Mark, I would encourage you to spread it, to share it, to lead people to it, help people find this podcast. Put a favorable rating. If you found it good and you love it, please let us know. Put a comment in the whatever platform you're on. Share your thoughts with us. And especially if you're on YouTube, or if you can migrate over to YouTube, that would be a great place to converse with me about this conversation. And so anyways, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe to our podcast. And until next time, please do what Mark is doing. Live sent, live enviado.